I'm Dr. Richard Keeling. I'm the director of the Student Health Service at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and I chair a task force on AIDS for the American College Health Association. I'd like to talk with you now for a few minutes about AIDS. AIDS is becoming a more common problem, and it's a great source of fear and apprehension and anxiety. It's something you read about all the time, but it's something that people still have a lot of questions about. One of the most common questions that people ask me is simply, how worried should I be? Is AIDS going to be part of my life? What changes should I make in my life because of AIDS? How should I adjust my behavior? Many of these questions arise from fear, and it's very understandable that people are worried. Every time you read about AIDS, every time you see a television show about it, it looks very fearful. You hear about more and more cases, about nearly 100% fatality rates for fully developed AIDS, and people get very scared. Some of the fear, though, comes from misinformation. And one of the things that we hope to do in this tape is to separate the facts from the fears, the rumors from the truth about AIDS. The most important message probably is that although people feel that this disease is completely out of the control, that in fact you can control your risk of AIDS. Each individual can make decisions in his or her own life that will protect himself from this disease. And there's no reason that you have to get AIDS. And that's the most important thing to say. To get back to the question that we asked at the beginning, though, how worried should you be? And unfortunately, the answer to that is pretty worried. The numbers of cases of AIDS are rising progressively. The fact is that we used to think about this disease as being one in which there were certain groups of people who got it, that most people didn't have to worry unless they did certain very specific things with certain very specific people. But the fact is that the heterosexual transmission of AIDS is now very well documented. And we now know for sure that heterosexual men and heterosexual women are being infected with the AIDS virus. This is becoming a big issue, and it's particularly important for heterosexual women to think about because of the implications of AIDS for their chance of having children later on. So it's critical for everybody, gay or straight, male or female, white or black, to know how to protect themselves against the virus that causes AIDS. Another way to answer that same question is this: how worried should I be? Well, you should be worried enough to take precautions to protect yourself. And what precautions are they? In the first place, never, ever use intravenous drugs. There are hundreds and hundreds of reasons not to shoot up drugs, not to share needles with other people. And AIDS is just one of those reasons. But it's a very critical, very pressing reason these days. And the fact is that no one ever should shoot up drugs. For most people, though, the major risk for the transmission of the AIDS virus is in sexual activity, in sexual intercourse. And it's important to make good decisions about sexual activity to avoid the risk of AIDS. You have some options. One option is abstinence, not to have sex at all. And the fact is that abstinence provides 100% protection against pregnancy, against sexually transmitted diseases in general, against AIDS in particular if it's transmitted sexually. Abstinence, therefore, is a very defensible option, and some people will choose to be abstinent to protect themselves against any of these things, and we should support that decision when people make it. Other people, though, won't choose to be abstinent, and some people end up having sexual activity even if they didn't decide ahead of time that they were going to. And for people who choose to be or end up being sexually active, it's important to know how to protect yourself in sexual intercourse against the risk of transmitting the AIDS virus. That means it's important to know some very specific things, what we might call survival skills in this age of AIDS. And those survival skills are much of what this tape will tell you about. The most important one simply is the use of condoms. And we'll talk through the tape and after about not just the techniques of protection by using condoms, but about the importance of assertiveness, about the importance of respecting yourself enough to be consistent in taking precautions, about respecting your partners importantly and well enough that you take precautions to protect them too. So think about it for a while as we watch this tape. Remember that your risk of getting AIDS is in your control. Remember that to protect yourself, you have to know how. Remember that that means making good decisions. Remember that this is not a disease that you can just decide that you won't get because of who you are or where to live. And as we look at this tape, think about those things, about your life, about reducing your risk, about protecting yourself and your partner. And now join me as we watch AIDS Alert and learn more about this disease and how to protect ourselves.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Goodhealth, and we're going to talk about AIDS.
I'm glad we're listening to this.
Yeah, AIDS has certainly been in the news.
Now, I'm sure you've all heard about AIDS being a threatening disease and spreading in epidemic proportions. The sudden awareness of this disease has raised questions and fears in all of us. Well, some of those fears are real, and some are not. Today, I'll give you the facts as we know them. AIDS stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. It's caused by a virus, HIV, which means Human Immunodeficiency Virus. A virus is a submicroscopic organism which causes an infection. Unlike bacteria, viruses are very hard to kill with medication. Now, let's take a look at the 4 words which make up AIDS. First, A stands for acquired, because the AIDS virus is not inherited. Second, I stands for immune, because the virus attacks and slowly destroys certain cells in the immune system, our natural defense for fighting infection. Third, D stands for deficiency, an immune deficiency, which means that the person is more susceptible to numerous severe, sometimes fatal opportunistic infections, and to some unusual forms of cancer. And finally, S stands for syndrome. Since the AIDS virus can trigger many different diseases, it is classified as a syndrome. So, this is how we arrive at the name AIDS. Yes, you in the back row.
Doctor, where did AIDS come from? And why is it a new disease?
Well, no one is exactly sure where AIDS began. We believe the AIDS virus existed in African monkeys for many years. AIDS is new to us because the virus was only identified in Americans in 1977.
Where is AIDS now?
Cases have been observed all around the world. In the U.S., the first cases were found in New York and California. But now the AIDS virus has infected people in all states and is no longer just in big cities. The first people with AIDS in the U.S. were mainly sexually active homosexual men, intravenous street drug abusers, and bisexual men, that is, men who have both male and female sex partners. Hemophiliacs and others who received blood transfusions were also at high risk of getting AIDS until testing procedures made the blood supply safer. But AIDS is spreading to the rest of the population. AIDS has now been diagnosed in heterosexual men and women, also in prostitutes, and female sex partners of male drug abusers and bisexual men.
What about kids?
Very few children have AIDS. Children who have AIDS usually develop it before or during birth from their mother's blood, which was already infected with the AIDS virus. A small number of children have acquired AIDS during a blood transfusion from blood contaminated with the AIDS virus.
Doctor, can I get AIDS if somebody in my school has it?
Well, AIDS is not spread by any kind of casual contact, such as shaking hands and hugging. Also, coughing and sneezing will not spread AIDS, since the AIDS virus doesn't travel in air like the common cold or flu virus. We know the AIDS virus lives in the body's fluids. especially the blood and semen. Therefore, we believe AIDS is spread mainly when a non-infected person is contaminated with the blood or semen of someone who is infected. Many of the AIDS cases come from sharing infected needles while shooting up drugs. The other main ways of exposure to the virus are through vaginal intercourse, anal intercourse, and, as far as we know, oral sex.
What about bathrooms at schools or at the movies? Are they safe to use?
Yes, they are. You see, the AIDS virus does not live long outside the human body. However, if you are concerned, clean the area with a diluted household disinfectant. There's no reason to fear catching the AIDS virus from public bathrooms, water fountains, public telephones, swimming pools, or hot tubs.
Does that mean doorknobs, knives and forks, plates, even glasses are safe?
Yes, they're safe. But it's not a good idea to share toothbrushes, razors, tweezers, or dental floss, anything that could become contaminated with blood.
My brother isn't gay, but he has a gay roommate. Does this increase his chances of getting AIDS?
Well, it depends on their relationship. There is no evidence AIDS can be transmitted by ordinary personal contact. If your brother and his roommate shoot up drugs or have sex with each other, it increases their risk of contracting AIDS. However, it is incorrect to assume that all homosexual men have or carry AIDS.
Is there a test to see if you have been exposed to AIDS?
Yes, there is. Initially, a test was developed for our blood banks to use to screen and to reject blood from donors who have been exposed to the AIDS virus. However, do not use the blood banks as a way to be tested. Contact a doctor or your local health clinic for complete information on the testing procedures and on the confidentiality of the results. Since the blood screening test tells if a person has been exposed to the virus, anyone concerned about past exposure should think about being tested.
Does everyone who receives a positive test have AIDS?
Well, a positive test indicates that you have been exposed to the AIDS virus. It does not mean you will get AIDS. However, it does mean that you can be infectious. We think that about a third of the people with a positive test will not develop AIDS. A third will eventually get AIDS, and the remaining third will get a milder illness called ARC, which stands for AIDS-related complex. ARC includes a wide range of disorders, such as chronic fatigue, enlarged lymph nodes, abnormal blood counts, weight loss, and minor recurrent infections. Some people with ARC will eventually develop full-blown AIDS. Everybody with a positive test, whether or not they have AIDS or ARC, should inform their sexual partner and take precautions to prevent transmission.
I've heard that you can have the AIDS virus for a long time before symptoms appear.
Well, that's right. Positive test results will usually appear within 3 to 6 months of exposure to the AIDS virus. It can take from 6 months to 6 years or longer for the symptoms to appear. At first, they're similar to those of a cold or the flu. However, the AIDS symptoms are more intense and last longer. The patient loses more strength, develops swollen lymph nodes, a sore throat, dry cough, and recurring diarrhea. Other symptoms are purplish body lumps that get bigger, frequent night sweats, a thick whitish coating or spots inside the mouth, unexplained loss of weight, easy bruising, and numerous herpes sores. And finally, the death rate for the AIDS patient is very high.
How can you make sure you won't get AIDS?
Since AIDS isn't transmitted by casual contact, we have a lot of control over our chances of being exposed. One way to avoid putting yourself into a risky situation is to never shoot up drugs and never share needles. If you are going to have an intimate relationship, get to know your partner before having sex with them. Ask questions. Be assertive. Use a condom. for condoms provide an effective barrier against AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, though they may not eliminate all risk. Do not have sex with anyone who has many sexual partners, or with street drug abusers or prostitutes. Basically, the more sexual partners you have, the greater your risk. If you have any questions, your local health clinic or doctor will have brochures on the guidelines for safer sex. Finally, abstaining from sexual contact provides 100% protection from not only AIDS, but other venereal diseases and unplanned pregnancies.
Okay, what about kissing? Isn't that mixing body fluids?
Well, a small amount of AIDS virus may be in the saliva of some people who are infected, but there's no evidence that saliva can transmit the disease. If there is any risk, it would come from very intense, prolonged kissing.
It sounds like we don't have all the answers yet.
Oh, that's right. We know, though, that you can't get AIDS by shaking hands, and that sexual encounters and sharing needles are the things to worry about. We should all be careful, but no one needs to be frightened of ordinary contact.
So what's being done to find a cure for AIDS?
A great deal of research, but this research takes time. Until a cure or a vaccine is found, everyone needs to know that the way to protect yourself from AIDS is to stay away from all high-risk situations. And if you have any concerns, talk with your doctor, your school nurse, or go to your local health clinic. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. But remember, as terrifying as AIDS is, it can be avoided. A healthy lifestyle is the best prevention for AIDS. And the good news is that this is under your control.
Let's sum up some of what we've learned about AIDS from AIDS Alert. We found out that AIDS is truly a frightening disease, that it's something that we all have to know about. But most importantly, we have found out that AIDS is something that's within your control. That by making healthy decisions about your life, about your behaviors, that you can control your risk of contracting the AIDS virus. The fact is that it doesn't take very much, that you can decide not to use drugs, that you can decide to make healthy decisions about sexual activity, that you can decide to talk to your partners honestly and thoroughly about what's happened in the past, about what's going to happen right now, about what may happen in the future as you discuss your sexual relationships. Perhaps the most important element of those discussions in sexual relationships has to do with condoms. And you've heard how condoms provide an effective barrier against the transmission of the AIDS virus during sexual intercourse. It's vitally important for everybody to use condoms. It's important for everybody to carry condoms, men and women both. A man should carry a condom in his pocket, a woman should carry a condom in her purse, and they should be sure that condoms are used consistently, effectively, and accurately with every time of sexual intercourse, first time and every time thereafter. It won't kill you to use a condom. It might kill you not to. It won't kill you to talk about it either, although it may make you feel awkward. And it's important to develop communication skills and ways of talking to sexual partners about the use of condoms, about safer sex, about what you're going to do, and about what you're not going to do. Although people sometimes are uncomfortable about bringing these things up, they are really life-saving topics for discussion. And survival skills in the age of AIDS requires that each of us develop ways to talk about these things with our partners. So suppose you suggest using a condom, and your partner says, no, I don't like to use those things. Or if you make me use a condom, it makes me think you don't trust me, or it makes me think that you suspect something about me, and I don't like that. What do you say? Well, maybe you say, look, this is a dangerous time. We want our love to be expressed fully, but we don't want to put each other at any risk. I don't suspect anything specific about you. But nobody really knows these days who's been infected and who hasn't. Not everybody has been tested. So please, for yourself and for me, Let's use a condom until we know more about this, until we know how safe we really are for each other. And if people don't want to use condoms, maybe you ought to think about whether you want to have that relationship or not. If the relationship is so important, then it's important enough to take precautions for life, for health, by using condoms. And that's an important message in this age. Use condoms first time, every time, to protect yourself and your partners against the risk of AIDS. But the more important message is the more general one, that just as condoms are behavioral things that you can do to protect yourself, that the whole risk of getting AIDS is in your control. And that's the most important thing we can say. So take precautions. Make healthy decisions. Think carefully in your own life about use of drugs, about sexual activity. Remember the things to be fearful about. Remember the things you don't have to worry about. And if you make good decisions, you can prevent getting AIDS yourself, and you can prevent hurting somebody else. Thanks very much.